Bill, we have a problem here. There's been a criminal investigation into what happened to the banks. One of the big banks that went down, the Anglo-Irish Bank, which is going to cost the state something in the region of, what is it, 35 billion?
35 and counting.
All right. And no criminal prosecutions of any kind. In America, what's happened with regard to criminal prosecutions with regard to the bank failures?
Well, in my day, when I was a regulator, we got over 1,000 felony convictions of elites. These are not little vice presidents, these are the top of the food chain. To date, in the United States, out of the specialty non-prime lenders, the big folks that caused the crisis, we have 0 convictions.
Why is that?
Well, the agencies have to serve the role as the Sherpas. We have to do the heavy lifting to help the investigators, and we have to serve as the guide that explains, because this is very complicated how these frauds work, and a typical police officer can't follow it. And that isn't happening. It's not happening in the United States. It didn't happen in Iceland until very recently. And Willy has brought me out to be, a small part of that process. And in particular, it didn't happen in Ireland. Here you have a report by the professor who became your governor of your central bank, and it's just absolutely blistering about the regulators who saw all the frauds happening. Now, he doesn't use the word fraud, but he describes frauds, and did nothing. He says that they walked softly and carried no stick.
Yeah, but that is not a criminal act here. Walking softly, even on the part of regulators, is not a crime.
No, but if the regulators don't function, then the prosecutors and the investigators, the guard, can't do their job effectively.
One of the difficulties, I wonder if you've had this experience in America, one of the difficulties that seems to be here is that the regulator seems to have approved of a lot of the more questionable actions undertaken by some of the banks, approved these actions in advance, and that compromises, I would have thought, both the criminal investigation and prosecution.
It can, but I bet you it is actually in practice, like in our experience, going to go the other direction. And here's why. Because they lied to them when they got the approvals. And when you lie to people to get approvals, it's even worse, because it demonstrates your fraudulent intent, and it actually makes the prosecution easier.
All right.
It's even crazier because the speech was virtually the same day
that Angela Merkel,
the speech in Ireland.
Olli Rehn's speech yesterday.
Olli Rehn's speech was virtually the same day that Angela Merkel was interviewed and said, what we ought to do in these crises is make sure that the creditors, the lenders, take a loss. And of course, the whole argument has been that Ireland can't possibly let any of them suffer a loss or the world will end. And you're supposed to do this to protect the German banks, but you have the German chancellor saying that's exactly what we need to do.
In America, are you surprised by what you've heard about these encrypted documents, that no passwords available? Are you surprised to hear of that?
Even I am shocked, and I'm used to having very weak responses to elite white-collar crime. This is nearly a year after
2 years and
the raids, so it proves there is no serious criminal investigation going on. Right? Again, I come back to the report of the now governor of your central bank, which says they deliberately hid the losses. That is an easily provable crime if you deliberately hide from the regulators.
But if they didn't hide it from the regulators, and the regulators said that's okay, what then?
Well, that's hard to believe that someone would actually say it's okay to violate the law, at which point you'd have to investigate them for bribery. Right? In which case you can get both of them convicted.
Well, there's no suggestion that anyone was bribed, and nobody has made that.
But that's the point,
by
right?
imputation here.
But
nobody
that's
has
the point.
that.
No one is. It's not a serious suggestion that Anglo, for example, came to the regulators and said, "We want to violate the law. Is that okay with you?" and the regulator said yes. So that's the
but I
hypothetical we're
understand that,
addressing.
for instance, when there was a sense in the regulator's office that there was a national interest involved in protecting the solvency of the banks and ensuring that none of the banks went under. And therefore, a blind eye was deliberately turned to conduct in the banks which were flagged to the regulator that would otherwise be regarded as criminal. Now, my question is that if people can show that the regulator knew what was going on and gave either turned a blind eye to what was going on or explicitly said okay because it's in the national interest, then in your view would that give those people involved in that exercise immunity from criminal prosecution?
A blind eye is no defense at all. An order to violate the law conceivably would be a defense. It would certainly make a prosecution difficult, but as I say, A, I don't think there's any evidence that such an order was given, and B, if such an order was given, then you do have to inquire whether there was bribery or people who are making these decisions stood to gain.
I think what might
Going to give us money? Who's going to lend us more money if we're saying, look at folks, we can't pay back the monies we've got already? Yeah.
I mean, I was the deputy director of the insurance fund that did $150 billion in resolutions of failed institutions. All right? So we know how to do resolutions of institutions. It's worse than what David has said. If you go the current route, Ireland has been playing the fool in the market for 2 years. If you continue down this route, the Irish economy will be destroyed. And that means the amount of money you can repay reduces, not increases. So you can make a much better deal now, actually in the interest of your creditors as well as you, because you will pay back more if your economy isn't destroyed. That's good business. That is not unethical. That is just plain how real businesses operate.
Minister hits at budget consequences, but that story in the Irish Examiner, exaggerated market needs must be met. This is Patrick Honohan saying we've no option but to defer to the financial markets because they call the shots.
This is back to the Bill.
Okay, so I don't know if it's a joke here, but in the United States we have posters that say the flogging will continue until morale improves. And that captures this dynamic perfectly. So the more we screw up the Irish economy, the worse Europe feels about us, so we have to screw up the economy more to make them happy. This is the definition of insanity.
But how do we get out of it? If we don't continue it, they refuse us money, and if we do continue it, we need more money.
They don't refuse you money, and you've heard why. It's the old joke. If you owe the bank $10,000, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $900 billion, you own the bank. You just have to figure that out in terms of leverage and stop being the fool in the market. The
trouble is we don't owe $900 billion yet.
No, you do.
Combined all the
you do. It's just still being paid in many cases, right? And that's the fear that it won't be paid and that their creditors will have to recognize losses. Remember, Angela Merkel has given you the answer. She's given a speech and said you should not pay the creditors in full. They already made lots of money making stupid loans. Stop compounding the problem. Listen to Angela Merkel.
And listen to Iceland. Iceland says the same thing, does it?
Yes, the government of Iceland said similar things. And look at something. The banks, the lenders, have to do something which is called due diligence, and they must do their duty when they make loans. The banks, they didn't, and they have to suffer from their operation. And if they don't do their duty, they lose money. And what's wrong with that?
I think what people are realising